These slides are in here both for an overview of the information that's available from these sites. So we kind of touched on a lot of that already, but also to make sure that you guys have actual links to them. Some of them are linked on the images. So if you don't see a link, try an image. But a little bit more background and reference material. And I mean, this kind of stuff, while links will probably break, sometimes just knowing that a tool is available and out there is enough to help you find the data that you need when you're in a pinch. So I would have killed for this kind of information 10 years ago. And you don't have to kill for it. So those are your student fees at work. All right, so we've touched on the Census Bureau already. They actually have some neat data sets for understanding our population and our country as a whole. So I encourage you to play with that if you're interested in exploring any social questions, whether in your final project for this class or in your professional life, or just as something that you have interest in. We've talked about, I think, Noah, quite a bit, the NGS source for benchmark data sheets is a critical source for surveyors, and then they are responsible for developing the systems and the process around the new geoid due to us in 2022 if they're still on schedule. And that is kind of the foundational source of all geodetic and GIS planning for our nation, but not obviously the only source of information. So what was once referred to as the NGDC, and you'll probably still see that way in a lot of sources, is now known as the National Center for Environmental Information, along with must not have fully updated that link. Along with the geodetic information that they used to host, they now host geolocated oceaneering information, atmospheric data, and geophysical data. There's all kinds of different data sets available from their site, and a lot of the methods of searching for that data are going to look fairly familiar, except that they're going to be thematic instead of just map-based. Then behind all of that, we have what's known as the SGDC, or the National Spatial Data Infrastructure. They're not something that most of the public sees. They're not a public-facing organization. But they're a standards organization made up of representatives of all of these other government and special interest groups that have a stake in how we manage our geospatial inventory as a nation and how we plan to coordinate all of this. So you're going to see references to FGDC standards throughout your interest in GIS. And that might be something that you need to learn more about if you get more involved in either designing data systems or making sure that you're complying with data system design. This is a resource that I wasn't terribly aware of previously, and I don't know if I had included it in your spreadsheet that I gave you. I think I do now. If not, it's on here, but this is another nationwide source for mostly GIS data sets. So these are spatially referenced sources of data, and they're anywhere from a very localized vegetation survey or a large regional weather study There's a whole range of different information out there. You can also link back into some of the USGS data sets. But that's another great resource to know about if you're looking at data on a national level. I had to play with OpenStreetMap a little bit. So OpenStreetMap works a little bit in the same way as Wikipedia. These objects and entities are provided by users. So any one of us can create an account and go in and provide information about spatial objects. Or as a user, you can go in and export this information for your use. So quality of data is just like Wikipedia, garbage in, garbage out. There's probably the potential for vandalism, although I would expect that there's not a lot of people that are spending time going in and erasing or deforming GIS resources, but there's a potential for it. There's also a potential for a wide range of quality, but it's a neat way to quickly get information that could just be a starting point for your project, or could provide, the background information for your field part of your map for you to overlay with your information that you're trying to present to your viewer. And this is a worldwide project, so not just for UAA campus. Just want to do a mic check real quickly. Can you guys hear me okay with this configuration?
Yes.
Thanks. Okay. And then moving on to a statewide level. You guys are probably familiar by now from our MAP3 or MAP-C project, or from other usage of the State Geospatial Data Clearinghouse. You can go through and each of these layers can be expanded and have information within them. And then you'll get a little bit of option to select just the area that you're interested in or the entire data set for the state. I have a copy of each of these layers within my personal library, many of which I have edited over time. But then I often go download the newest one and write over them and forget that I've made edits and start anew. But it's a lot cheaper than going out and building it all myself, so I'm not going to complain too badly. There's also a server approach to using this, which is in that resource that I provided you guys. And you don't have to manage the updates then, but you can't edit the files. And then there's a Alaska Mapper, which is also a viewer and a source for querying information. So if you bring up information in the area that you're interested in and you see a shape, you can click on that shape, and depending on what it is, it may have a link to records. This is how I do most of my land ownership or land management resource statewide. This primarily provides information about state resources, so they do have some basic info on federal lands, but the majority of the federal lands information I go to BLM for. And I know that's at least in your list, I think also in here. But they have a similar system, a similar mapping system that you can go in, select things, query objects. From Alaska Mapper, you can download the data in shapefiles or I think also KMLs, and use that information in your own system. I am still not entirely sure what the relationship is between Alaska Mapper and the Alaska State Geospatial Data Clearinghouse. They're essentially the same or similar, but I think maybe this information gets updated less quickly than Alaska Mapper, which is a live system used by State of Alaska employees in managing our state's resources. but the interface is a little bit different. So this is a list of state agencies, and then I threw in BLM because of their management of such a huge percentage of our state's lands. I think of them almost as a state agency. So these are great resources to look at if you want to do a project in the state of Alaska, which is not at all required, but is where I have most of my information from. So it might be a little bit easier. So these are agencies that publish primarily land information, infrastructure information. GIS is Alaska's version of USGS, so you can get LiDAR data sets, you can get geologic information and geophysical information. DCRA is the Community Resources Administration, so they have information on village communities. So they have a great data set of imagery for villages, and then some infrastructure mapping. They don't have that available for, I forget what the threshold is, but for larger cities, they have to do that all on their own, but they do it individually for a lot of the villages across Alaska. And then BLM for federal lands, and then you get down to the community level, Anchorage, Matsu, Fairbanks. There's some others out there. I haven't yet found one for Valdez. I don't think they have it available. I think Cordova has one you can call and ask for. So that's just a short list. I'm not sure about Juneau. I haven't had a project there recently. And then when you start to get into topical information, so rather than on a state management or a community level, if you're looking for information on a specific subject, here's a list of resources for that, and there's a whole bunch more in my spreadsheet. I use the Alaska Conservation Science Catalog a fair amount for vegetation mapping. The frozen ground maps are pretty cool for looking at permafrost. There's also a new permafrost model from UAA that I think I have linked in my spreadsheet. There's watershed management. So for Anchorage, we have our own wetland mapping available through a mapper program. And then they also have maps of all of the city's drainage, sewage systems as part of that. If you haven't yet seen the Alaska Shore Zone project, this is something, oh, that's right, another link I need to update. So there are a couple of different versions of the Shore Zone, and we paid a Canadian company millions of dollars over the course of many years to fly all of the coast of Alaska and take airborne imagery, oblique airborne imagery of the coast, which has been used to identify coastal ecosystems and biobands, so that they're predicting what types of animals or microorganisms might live in a range of the beach, and then identify areas that are vulnerable to oil spills or other hazards. And all of that data, including video data and all of the photographs, is available from this website. It's not the most useful in a geospatial setting unless you want to get into 3D modeling, which we're not going to go into that in this class, because those are oblique aerial images, so you can't just overlay them into a GIS system. But they have turned all of that information into GIS files that you can access through the REST server. I wouldn't recommend the geodatabase download that I just accidentally clicked on and should stop because it's enormous. But all of that data is out there. It looks like I'm running behind on schedule, so we'll move through the rest of these quickly. So those are resource databases for Alaska that you can access. So the last piece of this is the data that you go out and that you collect. And sometimes that data, if you're collecting information about your world, you may not be thinking about a GIS approach to it when you collect it. You may just be surveying, you know, for a census or for whatever other purpose, and you may collect that information in address form. So there's this process called geocoding, because this is a fairly common problem in managing our data. And there are tools designed for taking that information. Google is a great source for that because they have Google Maps, which is one of the most effective national address databases that we have of bringing that information in. So the first step is collect it into a database and QC it, because you want to make sure that you have things in a consistent, recognizable format, so that you're not trying to compare ST with a period or without a period or street in your formatting. Or, you know, maybe the software has developed far enough to deal with that for you, but you bring that information back to these systems. Oh, I thought it had a little bit more detail on how that happened, and it will output it into a point coordinate system for you. So that's geocoding in the address sense of it, which is normally how you hear that word applied. And then there's the collection of geospatial data through use of GPS or older survey methods, collecting that information, or taking old data sources and turning them into digital sources, which we have talked about how to do that with imagery. So if you have digital photos, that's a great starting place. If you don't have digital photos, you need to take your physical photos and get them into a digital form. I've learned in recent years, my iPad is a fantastic scanner. So I've actually digitized surveys with photos, sent them to my desktop or my laptop, orthorectified them using GIS and put them on a map, which is never something I imagined I would be able to do while staying in the field working on a project. Because this is what digitizing used to look like, which was taking a paper map, taking a stylus of some sort that captures that information digitally, and turning that into a shapefile. So that is data collection in a nutshell. If you want to get into the actual mechanics of data collection, I highly recommend remaining a survey student and sticking with survey classes in our department. Does anybody have questions on any of that?
Just a general question. Is there any formal requirement on like how many sources need to be used in the map, or as long as the map makes sense and the final product makes sense, it's all good?
We're going to essentially define goals as part of our process of what you're trying to represent, and try to use sources appropriate to that. I don't know that I'm necessarily going to apply a number of sources requirement, probably at least 2 or 3, but I think what I would focus on more than that is an area that you're interested in and a topic that you're interested in relation to that area.
Okay.
And then we can talk about what would be appropriate for representing that.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so at the start of the lecture, you mentioned that we got the lab due next week, and then this upcoming lab on Thursday is due the following week after that, but we do have a lab due today still, right?
Lab 4 was due today. Lab 5, which is really the first half of Lab 6, is due next Tuesday.
Okay, gotcha. All right, thank you.